The fluorescent lights in the grocery store flickered with the same tired rhythm they had for the past 15 years, casting a pale glow over rows of canned goods and wilting produce. Sarah Mitchell stood behind the register, her fingers moving automatically across the scanner as she rang up a customer's items. Milk, bread, generic cereal. The total flashed on the screen, and she forced a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. 1947, she said, her voice carrying the practiced cheerfulness of someone who had learned to hide exhaustion behind politeness. The customer handed her a 20, barely glancing at her face. Sarah made change, her hand steady despite the ache that had settled into her joints somewhere around hour 6 of her shift. She had 4 more hours to go. After that, when she'd drive her 15-year-old sedan across town to her second job cleaning offices in the business district. The car's check engine light had been on for 3 weeks now, blinking its orange warning every time she turned the key. She couldn't afford to find out what it meant. Through the store's front windows, she could see the parking lot stretching out into the gray afternoon. March had arrived, cold and stubborn, refusing to give way to spring. Patches of old snow clung to the edges of the asphalt, dirty and defeated. Sarah watched a young mother wrestle a toddler into a car seat, the child's protests audible even through the glass. She thought of her own daughter, Emma, who was 11 now and growing up faster than Sarah could keep pace with. Emma was at home right now, or probably doing homework at the kitchen table in their cramped 2-bedroom apartment. Or maybe she was staring at the refrigerator, hoping something new would materialize for dinner. Sarah had left $20 on the counter this morning with a note. Pizza money, she'd written, as if that made it okay that she wouldn't be home until nearly midnight. As if frozen pizza could substitute for the kind of childhood Emma deserved. The automatic doors slid open, bringing in a gust of cold air, and Mrs. Patterson from 2 streets over. She offered Sarah a sympathetic smile that made Sarah's stomach tighten. Sympathy had a way of making everything worse, of highlighting just how visible her struggles were to everyone around her. "Sarah, dear," Mrs. Patterson said, setting a basket on the counter. "How are you holding up?" "Just fine, Mrs. Patterson. How are you today?" The older woman's eyes lingered on Sarah's face, taking in the shadows beneath her eyes, the way her uniform hung a little looser than it had last month. "You work too hard, sweetheart. You need to take care of yourself." Sarah nodded, scanning items with mechanical efficiency. She'd heard variations of this advice countless times. Take care of yourself. Rest more. Ask for help. All of it well-meaning, all of it utterly useless when rent was due in 5 days and she was still $200 short. The advice never came with a check attached. "I'm doing okay," Sarah said, bagging the groceries. "Emma keeps me going." "That girl's lucky to have you." Mrs. Patterson paid, then paused at the end of the counter. "I heard about your aunt. I'm sorry for your loss." The words landed heavily in Sarah's chest. Aunt Evelyn. She'd died 3 weeks ago, slipping away in her sleep at 78. Sarah hadn't seen her in over a year. Life had a way of putting distance between people, even family, even people you loved. "Thank you," Sarah managed. After Mrs. Patterson left, Sarah stood motionless for a moment, letting the weight of grief wash over her in small, manageable waves. Aunt Evelyn had been her father's sister, a woman who'd lived alone in a cluttered house on the edge of town. She'd been kind to Sarah as a child, pressing chocolate chip cookies into her hands during rare family gatherings. But as Sarah grew older and her parents died, as her marriage fell apart and poverty tightened its grip, those gatherings had stopped. Everyone had gone their separate ways, connected only by blood and obligation. The funeral had been small. Sarah's siblings had been there, of course. Her older brother David, successful and smug in his expensive suit, talking loudly about his real estate investments. Her younger sister Monica, married to a dentist, carrying the kind of designer purse Sarah would never be able to afford. And her cousin Brandon, Aunt Evelyn's favorite, who'd always been treated like the golden child, despite contributing nothing to the family beyond his charm. They'd stood in the cemetery together, a collection of people who shared DNA but little else. And when the lawyer mentioned that Aunt Evelyn had left a will, Sarah had seen the way her siblings' faces changed, interest sharpened behind their eyes. Grief took a backseat to calculation. The reading of the will was scheduled for tomorrow, Saturday. Sarah had already arranged to take the morning off from the grocery store, though it meant losing hours she desperately needed. But family obligation demanded her presence, even if that family had barely spoken to her in years. Even if she already knew she wouldn't be getting anything meaningful. Her shift ended at 7. Sarah clocked out, grabbed her coat from the break room, and walked to her car. The check engine light greeted her like an old enemy. She drove across town through streets that grew progressively nicer, the houses larger, the lawns more manicured. The office building she cleaned stood 20 stories tall, all glass and steel and cold corporate efficiency. She let herself in through the service entrance, nodded to the night security guard, and took the elevator to the 14th floor. The accounting firm that occupied this level always left a mess. Coffee cups abandoned on desks, papers scattered everywhere, trash bins overflowing. Sarah moved through the empty cubicles with quiet efficiency, her hands working while her mind drifted. She thought about Aunt Evelyn's house. She'd visited once, years ago, before Emma was born. The place had been filled with furniture, old furniture, the kind that looked expensive but felt worn out. Dark wood and heavy fabrics. Aunt Evelyn had collected things, filling every room with antiques and oddities she'd found at estate sales and auctions. Sarah's siblings had always made fun of it, calling the house a glorified junkyard. But Sarah remembered how Aunt Evelyn's eyes lit up when she talked about her collections, how she'd run her fingers over the carved details of a dresser or the aged leather of a chair, explaining where each piece came from, the history it carried. To Aunt Evelyn, these objects weren't junk. They were stories. They were connections to the past. Sarah finished cleaning at 11:30. She drove home through empty streets, past closed storefronts and flickering streetlights. The apartment building where she lived was a squat, gray structure that always smelled faintly of mildew and old cooking oil. She climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, her legs heavy with exhaustion. Emma was asleep on the couch, the television playing softly. An empty pizza box sat on the coffee table. Sarah stood in the doorway, looking at her daughter. Emma's face was peaceful in sleep, one hand tucked beneath her cheek. She'd gotten so tall lately. Soon she'd be taller than Sarah. Soon she'd be a teenager, then an adult, and Sarah desperately wanted to give her more than this. More than worn furniture and second-hand clothes, and a mother who was always working, always tired, always just barely hanging on. She gently woke Emma and guided her to bed, then collapsed onto her own mattress without bothering to change out of her work clothes. Sleep came fast and heavy, pulling her under like a tide. Morning arrived too soon. Sarah woke to pale sunlight filtering through thin curtains. Her body ached in the familiar way it always did, muscles protesting the constant demand she placed on them. She showered, dressed in the only decent outfit she owned, a simple black dress she'd bought at a thrift store years ago, and made breakfast for Emma. "Where are you going?" Emma asked, spooning cereal into her mouth. "The lawyer's office, for Aunt Evelyn's will reading." Emma nodded, her expression carefully neutral. She was old enough now to understand what money meant, what the lack of it cost them. "Do you think she left you anything?" Sarah forced a smile. "I don't know, sweetheart. Probably not much. But I have to go anyway. It's the right thing to do. Will Uncle David be there?" "Probably." Emma made a face. She'd met David exactly twice and disliked him both times. He had a way of talking to people as if they were beneath him, especially Sarah. Especially after her divorce, when she'd moved into this apartment and started working 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. Sarah kissed Emma's forehead. "Mrs. Chen next door said you can hang out there if you need anything. I'll be back by lunchtime." The drive to the lawyer's office took 20 minutes. The building was old, but well-maintained. Brick and stone with tall windows that looked out over a park. Sarah parked on the street and fed quarters into the meter, counting out just enough for an hour. She couldn't afford more than that. Inside, the reception area was quiet and professional. A secretary directed her to a conference room on the 2nd floor. Sarah climbed the stairs slowly, her stomach tight with a familiar anxiety. She didn't belong in places like this, places with thick carpets and paintings on the walls, places where people spoke in soft tones about estates and inheritances. The conference room door was open. Inside, her siblings were already seated around a long wooden table. David sat at one end, his posture relaxed and confident. Monica sat beside him, scrolling through her phone. Brandon leaned back in his chair, looking bored. And at the head of the table sat Mr. Whitmore, Aunt Evelyn's lawyer, a thin man in his 60s, with wire-rimmed glasses and a kind face. "Sarah," Mr. Whitmore said, standing as she entered. "Thank you for coming. Please, sit." Sarah took a seat across from Monica, feeling immediately out of place in her thrift store dress. Monica's outfit probably cost more than Sarah made in a month. David glanced at her, his expression a mixture of pity and dismissal. "Good of you to make it," David said, as if Sarah were late instead of exactly on time. "Busy schedule?" "I work weekends," Sarah replied quietly. "Right. Of course." He said it the way someone might acknowledge an unfortunate affliction. Mr. Whitmore cleared his throat, and drawing everyone's attention. "Now that we're all here, let's begin." Evelyn left very specific instructions regarding the distribution of her estate. He opened a folder, pulling out several documents. "First, I should mention that Evelyn's financial assets, her savings and investments, amount to approximately $43,000. Sarah saw David and Monica exchange glances. 43,000. Not a fortune, but enough to matter. Enough to make a difference. "The cash assets," Mr. Whitmore continued, "are to be divided equally between David and Monica Mitchell." David smiled. Monica looked satisfied. Neither seemed surprised. Sarah felt nothing. She'd expected this. Her siblings had always been Aunt Evelyn's favorites, the successful ones, the ones who'd built careers and families that looked good from the outside. And Sarah was the failure, the one who'd married young and divorced younger, the one who cleaned floors and rang up groceries. Why would Aunt Evelyn leave her anything? Additionally, Mr. Whitmore said, Evelyn's house and the land it sits on are to be sold. The proceeds will be split between David, Monica, and Brandon. Brandon grinned. Finally. That old place has been falling apart for years. Should still fetch a decent price, though. The house is in good condition, Mr. Whitmore said mildly. It will likely sell for around $200,000. More exchanged glances, more quiet calculations. Sarah did the math in her head. Split 3 ways, that was over $60,000 each. It was enough to change everything. Enough to fix her car, pay off debt, maybe even go back to school. Enough to give Emma the kind of opportunities Sarah had always dreamed of providing. But she wasn't getting any of it. Now, Mr. Whitmore said, looking directly at Sarah, regarding the contents of the house, Evelyn left very specific instructions about her collections. Sarah's heart sank. She knew what was coming. The junk, the old furniture no one wanted. The furniture and personal items are to be divided as follows. Mr. Whitmore consulted his notes. David receives the dining room set, the living room sofa and chairs, and the mahogany desk from the study. Monica receives the china cabinet, the bedroom furniture from the master suite, and the Persian rug in the hallway. Brandon receives the grandfather clock, the library shelves, and the antique mirror in the foyer. Each item was valuable. Sarah knew enough about antiques to recognize that. Her siblings were getting pieces that could be sold for thousands of dollars, pieces that meant something. And Sarah, Mr. Whitmore said, his voice gentle, Evelyn left you the armoire from the guest bedroom. Silence filled the room. Then David laughed. Not a kind laugh. A sharp, mocking sound that cut through the air like broken glass. The armoire? He repeated. That old piece of junk? Monica covered her mouth, but Sarah could see the smile behind her hand. Even Brandon snickered. Sarah's face burned. She knew the armoire David was talking about. She'd seen it on that long-ago visit. It was huge and dark and carved with elaborate designs that had probably been beautiful once, but now just looked old and tired. It had taken up most of the guest bedroom, looming in the corner like a forgotten monument. Aunt Evelyn had kept linens in it, Sarah thought. Maybe old clothes. Nothing important. That thing's probably worth $50 at a yard sale, David continued. If that. Why would she even bother leaving it to anyone? Maybe she felt sorry for Sarah, Monica said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. You know, wanted to make sure she got something. Mr. Whitmore's expression didn't change, but Sarah saw disapproval flicker in his eyes. Evelyn's wishes were very clear. Sarah receives the armoire. All items must be claimed within 30 days, or they will be donated. Well, Sarah can have fun hauling that monstrosity out of there, Brandon said. Hope you have a big truck. Sarah sat motionless, her hands clenched in her lap. Shame washed over her in hot waves. But this was worse than getting nothing. This was a public declaration of her worthlessness. Even in death, even in the formal setting of a lawyer's office, her family found ways to remind her that she didn't measure up. I'll take it, she said quietly. David raised his eyebrows. Seriously? Sarah, you don't have to. It's junk. Just let them donate it. I'll take it, Sarah repeated, her voice stronger now. Aunt Evelyn left it to me. I'll take it. Your choice, Monica said with a shrug. Don't expect any help moving it, though. That thing weighs a ton. The meeting concluded quickly after that. David and Monica discussed hiring movers to collect their items. Brandon talked about getting the house appraised as soon as possible. They made plans over Sarah's head, their voices filling the room with excited chatter about money and sales and profit. Sarah stood and left without saying goodbye. She walked back to her car, her legs moving automatically while her mind spun. The armoire. Of all things, the armoire. She didn't even know where she would put it. Her apartment barely had room for the furniture she already owned. But something in her refused to let her siblings' mockery be the final word. Aunt Evelyn had left her that piece for a reason. Maybe it was worthless. Maybe it was just one last reminder that Sarah was the family failure. But it was hers, and she would claim it. She drove home in silence, the weight of the morning settling into her bones. When she walked into the apartment, Emma looked up from the couch. How did it go? Emma asked. Sarah sat down beside her daughter, suddenly exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical labor. Your uncle and aunt got the money, and the house. I got a piece of furniture. What kind of furniture? An old armoire, a big cabinet thing. Your Uncle David called it junk. Emma frowned. That's mean. Yeah. Sarah leaned back, closing her eyes. Yeah, it is. Are you going to take it? I don't know where we'd put it. We could put it in my room, Emma suggested. I could keep my clothes in it. It would be like having something from Aunt Evelyn, you know? A piece of her. Sarah looked at her daughter, this beautiful, perceptive child, who somehow saw value where others saw waste. You'd want that? Sure. I mean, if Uncle David says it's junk, it's probably actually cool. He has terrible taste. A laugh escaped Sarah's throat, surprising her. No, you know what? You're right. We'll get it. I'll figure out how to move it somehow. Over the next week, Sarah tried to arrange transportation. The Armoire was too big for her car. Rental trucks cost money she didn't have. She called a few moving companies, but their quotes made her stomach drop. $200. $300. Amounts that might as well have been $2 million for all the difference it made. Finally, she swallowed her pride and called the one person she knew who had a truck. Her ex-husband, Mark. They hadn't spoken in 6 months, not since the last child support payment had arrived 3 weeks late with no explanation. "Sarah," he said when he answered, his voice carrying that particular blend of annoyance and resignation she'd come to know so well. "What do you need?" She explained the situation, hating how desperate she sounded. "It's for Emma," she added, as if that would somehow make the request more reasonable. It would mean a lot to her, to have something from my family. Mark sighed. "When? Next Saturday? I'll pay for gas." "You don't have to pay me, Sarah. I'll do it for Emma." The words should have felt like kindness. Instead, they felt like judgment. One more reminder that she needed help she couldn't afford to give. Saturday arrived cold and cloudy. Mark pulled up in his truck at 9 in the morning, and they drove to Aunt Evelyn's house together in uncomfortable silence. The house looked smaller than Sarah remembered, sitting at the end of a long gravel driveway surrounded by overgrown hedges. The windows were dark, the porch empty. It had the abandoned look of a place waiting to be dismantled and sold. Sarah used the key Mr. Whitmore had given her to unlock the front door. Inside, the house smelled of dust and old wood, and something floral that must have been Aunt Evelyn's perfume, still lingering in the fabrics and carpets. Furniture filled every room, exactly as Sarah remembered, dark and ornate and heavy with history. "Jesus," Mark muttered, looking around. "This place is like a museum." They navigated through the hallway to the guest bedroom. The armoire dominated the far wall, rising nearly to the ceiling. It was massive, constructed from what looked like solid oak, or maybe mahogany, carved with intricate patterns of leaves and flowers. The doors were tall and heavy, with brass handles that had tarnished to a dull green. "That's it?" Mark asked. "That's it?" He walked around it, assessing. It's going to be a nightmare to move. How are we supposed to get this down the stairs?" Carefully. They spent the next hour emptying the armoire. Inside were old linens, exactly as Sarah had guessed. Yellowed sheets and moth-eaten blankets that smelled of lavender and thyme. She piled them on the bed, intending to throw them away later. When the armoire was finally empty, Mark tried to lift one end. It barely budged. "This thing weighs as much as a car," he said. "We're going to need help." "We don't have help." "Then we're going to need more time. And probably some tools." They worked methodically, taking breaks when their muscles screamed in protest. They unscrewed the decorative crown molding at the top to reduce weight. They removed the back panel, which came away in sections. Slowly, painfully, the armoire became manageable, and still impossibly heavy, but movable. By noon, they had maneuvered it down the stairs, scraping paint off the walls and leaving scuff marks. Sarah knew she should probably fix, but couldn't bring herself to care about. They loaded it into the truck bed, securing it with ropes that Mark promised would hold. "You really want this thing?" Mark asked, as they stood in the driveway, both sweating despite the cold. "Emma wants it." He nodded slowly. "She's a good kid." "She is. Better than we deserve, probably." Sarah didn't respond to that. The observation sat between them, uncomfortable and true. They drove back to Sarah's apartment in silence, Unloading the armoire was somehow worse than loading it had been. The apartment building had no elevator. The stairs were narrow and steep. They had to pivot and angle and curse their way up 3 flights, disturbing neighbors who opened their doors to stare. By the time they wrestled the armoire into Emma's bedroom, Sarah's entire body felt like one continuous bruise. Mark stood in the doorway, catching his breath. "Where do you want it?" "Against that wall, I think." They positioned it carefully, then stepped back. The armoire looked absurdly large in Emma's small room, overwhelming the space with its dark presence. But there was something undeniably impressive about it, too. The carvings caught the light, revealing details Sarah hadn't noticed before. Faces hidden among the leaves, animals tucked into corners. It was craftsmanship from another era, when people built things to last generations. "Not bad," Mark admitted. "Still junk. So, though." "Maybe." He left without ceremony, and Sarah stood alone in Emma's room, staring at the armoire. She ran her fingers over the carved surface, feeling the smooth wood worn by decades of hands. What had Aunt Evelyn seen in this piece? Why leave it specifically to Sarah? Emma came home that afternoon, her face lighting up when she saw the armoire. "Mom, you got it?" "We got it. Your dad helped." Emma walked around it slowly, examining every detail. "It's beautiful. It's old. That's what makes it beautiful." Emma opened one of the doors. The hinges creaked softly. Inside, the space was vast and empty, waiting to be filled. "I'm going to put all my clothes in here. It's like having a closet from a castle." Sarah smiled despite her exhaustion. "Whatever makes you happy, sweetheart." Over the next few days, Emma took ownership of the armoire with an enthusiasm that surprised Sarah. She folded her clothes carefully and arranged them on the shelves. She hung her few dresses from the rod inside. She even cleaned the brass handles until they shone. Sarah watched her daughter's transformation of the space with quiet wonder. Emma treated the armoire like a treasure, which somehow made it feel like one. Maybe David was right. Maybe it was just junk. But if Emma saw value in it, then it had value. Sometimes worth was just a matter of perspective. On Tuesday evening, Sarah came home from her shift at the grocery store to find Emma sitting cross-legged in front of the armoire, a puzzled expression on her face. "Mom," Emma said without looking up, "there's something weird about this thing." Sarah set down her purse. "Weird how?" "The inside. It's smaller than it should be." "What do you mean?" Emma stood and gestured to the armoire. "Look, the outside is like this wide." She held her arms out, indicating the full width of the piece. "But inside, it's narrower. There's like 6 inches missing on each side." Sarah frowned. She opened both doors and looked inside, then walked around to the back. Emma was right. The interior space didn't match the exterior dimensions. There should have been more room inside. "Maybe it's just the way it's built," Sarah said. "Old furniture was different." "Or maybe," Emma said, her eyes bright with sudden excitement, "there's a hidden compartment." Sarah laughed. "This isn't a movie, Emma. But it could be. Aunt Evelyn collected antiques, right? And sometimes old furniture has secret spaces. I saw it on a show once." "Sweetheart, I don't think— Can we at least look? Please." Sarah sighed, but she couldn't deny the small spark of curiosity that had ignited in her chest. "Okay. How do we look?" They spent the next hour examining every inch of the armoire. Emma tapped on the wood, listening for hollow sounds. Sarah ran her fingers along the seams, searching for hidden latches or buttons. They found nothing. "Maybe it's just thick wood," Sarah said finally. "Maybe there's extra bracing inside the walls." Emma looked disappointed but nodded. "Yeah, maybe." They gave up and went to bed, but Sarah lay awake that night, thinking about the armoire. about the missing inches, about why Aunt Evelyn would leave her, specifically her, a piece of furniture her siblings considered worthless. The next day, Sarah couldn't shake the thought. During her lunch break at work, she pulled out her phone and searched for information about antique armoires. She learned that European furniture makers in the 18th and 19th centuries often incorporated hidden compartments for valuables. Secret drawers activated by pressing hidden panels, false backs that swung open, entire sections that could only be accessed if you knew the trick. When her shift ended, she drove home faster than usual. Emma was at the kitchen table doing homework. "Emma," Sarah said, "we're going to check the armoire again." Emma's head shot up. "Really?" "Really. But we're going to be systematic about it this time." They moved everything out of the armoire first, piling Emma's clothes on the bed. Then Sarah grabbed a measuring tape from the kitchen drawer. She measured the outside width of the armoire. 68 inches. Then she measured the inside. 56 inches. 12 inches, Sarah said slowly. "There's 12 inches missing." "That's a lot," Emma breathed. Sarah measured the depth next. Outside, 24 inches. Inside, 20 inches. Another 4 inches unaccounted for. They stared at each other, the same thought visible in both their eyes. There was space hidden somewhere in this piece of furniture. The question was how to access it. Sarah started at the bottom, running her hands along the baseboard. Nothing. She moved up, checking each carved section of the exterior, pressing and pulling, searching for anything that might trigger a release mechanism. Emma did the same on the other side. An hour passed, then 2. Sarah's fingers were sore, her back aching from bending and reaching. Just as she was about to give up, her hand pressed against a carved rose near the right side of the armoire, and something clicked. The sound was soft but unmistakable, a mechanical release, metal against wood. Sarah froze. "Emma, did you hear that?" "What was it?" Sarah pressed the rose again. Click. She felt the panel beside it shift slightly, moving inward perhaps a quarter of an inch. Her heart began to pound. "There's something here," she whispered. She pressed harder, and the panel slid sideways, revealing a narrow seam that hadn't been visible before. With trembling fingers, she gripped the edge and pulled. The entire right side panel of the armoire's interior swung open like a door, revealing a hidden compartment behind it. Emma gasped. Sarah couldn't breathe. The space was narrow but tall, running the full height of the armoire, and it wasn't empty. Inside, stacked carefully, were bundles, dozens of them, wrapped in what looked like waxed paper and tied with string. Sarah reached in with shaking hands and pulled one out. It was heavy, compact. When she unwrapped the paper, her mind couldn't process what she was seeing. Money. Stacks of $100 bills, bound with paper bands. "Mom," Emma's voice sounded very far away. "What is that?" Sarah couldn't answer. She pulled out another bundle. More bills. And another. And another. The compartment was full of them, packed efficiently into every available inch of space. She sank to the floor, bundles of cash spilling around her. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. This wasn't possible. This couldn't be real. But the money felt real. The weight of it. The texture of the paper. The faint smell of ink and age. Emma knelt beside her, picking up one of the bundles with reverent care. "Mom, how much is this?" Sarah didn't know. Couldn't begin to calculate. Each bundle looked like it contained at least $10,000, maybe more. And there were dozens of them in the hidden compartment. Maybe more than dozens. She stood on unsteady legs and checked the other side of the armoire. There was a matching carved rose on the left panel. She pressed it. Another click. Another hidden door swung open, revealing a second compartment, also filled with wrapped bundles. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered. "Oh my God." They pulled everything out, working in stunned silence. The bundles covered Emma's bed, the floor, every available surface. When the compartments were finally empty, Sarah stood in the middle of the room, surrounded by more money than she had ever seen in her entire life. "We need to count it," she said, her voice barely audible. They counted through the night. Each bundle contained exactly $10,000 in $100 bills. There were 326 bundles, $3,260,000. Sarah sat on the floor at 3 in the morning, the final tally written on a piece of paper in her trembling handwriting. Emma leaned against her shoulder, exhausted and overwhelmed. "What do we do?" Emma whispered. Sarah didn't answer. She couldn't. Her mind had gone blank with shock. This was more money than she could earn in a dozen lifetimes. More money than she'd ever dreamed of having. It was enough to change everything. To erase every debt, every worry, every sleepless night spent calculating how to pay bills. It was the answer to prayers she'd been too tired to pray. But it was also impossible to explain, impossible to justify. Where had Aunt Evelyn gotten this money? Why had she hidden it? And why had she left it, hidden and secret, to Sarah? The questions spiraled through her mind, but beneath them ran a single crystal-clear thought. This was hers. Aunt Evelyn had given her the armoire, had left it specifically to her. Whatever was inside, whatever fortune had been hidden within those false panels, it belonged to Sarah now. She looked at the bundles of cash covering her daughter's bedroom, and for the first time in years, she let herself imagine a different life. A life where Emma didn't have to wear second-hand clothes or eat frozen pizza for dinner. What a life where Sarah didn't have to work until her body broke. A life where they had options, security, hope. "We don't tell anyone," Sarah said finally. "Not yet. Not until I figure out what to do." Emma nodded against her shoulder. "Okay." They sat together in the quiet apartment, surrounded by bundles of cash and the massive armoire that had delivered them. Outside, the world continued its indifferent rotation, unaware that everything in Sarah Mitchell's life had just fundamentally changed. The sun was rising when Sarah finally moved. She and Emma carefully wrapped the money back in its paper, handling each bundle as if it might disappear if they weren't gentle enough. They placed everything back into the hidden compartments, closed the false panels, and stood looking at the armoire as if seeing it for the first time. It looked exactly the same as it had yesterday, dark and carved and ancient. But now Sarah understood what Aunt Evelyn had seen in it. Not junk, not a cast-off piece of furniture to be mocked and dismissed. This was a gift, a secret passed from one woman to another, a last act of love from someone who had watched Sarah struggle and wanted, finally, to give her a way out. Sarah pressed her hand against the carved surface, feeling the grain of the wood beneath her palm. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you, Aunt Evelyn." Emma hugged her mother tightly. Neither of them spoke. There were no words big enough to contain what had just happened. No way to articulate the magnitude of the shift that had occurred in the space of a single night. Finally, Sarah pulled away. "You need to sleep. And I need to think." "Are we going to keep it?" Emma asked. "I don't know. I need to figure out if it's even legal to keep it." "But Aunt Evelyn left it to you." "I know. But money like this..." "Emma, there are rules about these things. Taxes, laws. I don't want to do anything that could get us in trouble." Emma nodded, though her expression showed she didn't really understand. Sarah barely understood herself. Her brain felt sluggish, overwhelmed by exhaustion and shock. She called in sick to both her jobs. It was the first time she'd called in sick in over 2 years, and the guilt gnawed at her even as she did it. But she needed time. Time to think. Time to research. Time to figure out what the hell she was supposed to do with $3 million hidden in her daughter's bedroom. She made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with her laptop. Her hands shook as she typed searches into Google. How to handle large cash inheritance. Do you have to report found money? Tax implications of inherited cash. The results were confusing and contradictory. Some articles suggested that inherited money wasn't taxable. Others warned about gift taxes and estate taxes. Most assumed the money would be properly documented, transferred through banks, recorded in official ways. None of them addressed the specific situation Sarah found herself in. Money hidden in furniture. Money that appeared nowhere in Aunt Evelyn's will or estate documents. Money that existed in a legal gray area Sarah didn't know how to navigate. She thought about calling a lawyer. But lawyers cost money she still didn't have. And more importantly, thought they would ask questions. Where did the money come from? Why was it hidden? Had Aunt Evelyn done something illegal to obtain it? That last question stopped Sarah cold. What if the money was illegal? What if Aunt Evelyn had been involved in something criminal, and this cash was evidence or proceeds or something that would bring police and investigators in questions Sarah couldn't answer? Her stomach churned with anxiety. Maybe she should just put it back in the armoire and pretend she'd never found it. Return the furniture to Aunt Evelyn's house. Let someone else discover the secret. Walk away before this blessing became a curse. But even as the thought formed, she knew she wouldn't do it. Couldn't do it. This money represented everything she'd never been able to provide for Emma. Education, security, or a future that didn't involve working multiple jobs and counting pennies. She couldn't walk away from that. Not after years of struggling, years of falling short, years of watching her daughter grow up with less than she deserved. Number. Whatever this money was, wherever it came from, Aunt Evelyn had left it to her, and Sarah was going to find a way to keep it. She spent the day researching, reading articles about inheritance law and tax code until her eyes burned. By evening, she had a rough plan. She would need to verify the money was real. Counterfeit bills would be worthless and potentially criminal to possess. She would need to find a way to deposit or use the money without raising red flags. And most importantly, she would need to keep it secret until she understood exactly what she was dealing with. Emma woke up around noon, wandered into the kitchen, and made cereal. She sat across from Sarah at the table, eating slowly. "Did you figure it out?" Emma asked. "Not yet, but I'm working on it." "Are you scared?" Sarah looked at her daughter. Emma's eyes were wide, perceptive, seeing more than a child her age should have to see. "Yeah," Sarah admitted. "I'm terrified. Because it might be bad money? Because it might change everything, and I don't know how to handle that." Emma was quiet for a moment, chewing her cereal thoughtfully. "Uncle David called it junk." "He did. But it wasn't junk. It was treasure." Sarah smiled despite her anxiety. "Yeah, it was treasure. Maybe that's why Aunt Evelyn left it to you, because she knew Uncle David and Aunt Monica would just sell it without looking. But you'd keep it, and you'd care about it." The observation settled into Sarah's chest with unexpected weight. Emma was right. If Aunt Evelyn had left the armoire to David or Monica, they would have sold it immediately, probably without even cleaning it out first. They never would have discovered the hidden compartments. They never would have found the money. But Aunt Evelyn had known Sarah would keep it, would accept even the mockery of her siblings rather than let the piece go, would take it home and care for it, and, eventually, discover what lay hidden inside. This hadn't been random. It had been deliberate, a choice made by a woman who understood exactly what she was doing. Sarah stood and walked to Emma's bedroom. The armoire loomed against the wall, keeping its secrets behind carved wood and false panels. She opened the hidden compartment again, on pulling out one of the bundles. She unwrapped it carefully and held a single $100 bill up to the light. It looked real, felt real. She'd handled enough money working retail to have a sense of what genuine bills felt like. But she needed to be sure. The next morning, Sarah drove to a bank across town, one where she didn't have an account. She brought a single $100 bill with her, claiming she'd received it as a tip at work and wanted to verify it wasn't counterfeit. The teller examined it under ultraviolet light, checked the watermark, ran her fingers over the texture. "It's genuine," the teller said, handing it back. "You're good." Sarah's relief was almost overwhelming. She repeated the process at 2 other banks over the next 3 days, bringing different bills each time. Everyone came back genuine. The money was real. $3,260,000 in real, legal currency. Now she just had to figure out how to use it without destroying her life in the process. The weeks that followed the discovery existed in a strange, suspended reality. Sarah went to work, came home, made dinner, helped Emma with homework. On the surface, nothing had changed, but underneath, everything was different. She moved through her days with a secret burning in her chest, a knowledge that separated her from the rest of the world. $3 million sat hidden in Emma's bedroom, and no one knew. Sarah researched obsessively. Late at night, after Emma was asleep, she hunched over her laptop at the kitchen table, reading everything she could find about large cash deposits, structuring laws, and IRS reporting requirements. What she learned terrified her. Banks were required to report any cash deposit over $10,000. Multiple smaller deposits designed to avoid that threshold, called structuring, were illegal. Even if the money itself was legitimate, trying to hide it could land her in federal prison. The system was designed to catch exactly what she was trying to do. She couldn't just walk into a bank with bundles of $100 bills. The questions would be immediate and invasive. Where did this come from? Why do you have it in cash? Can you prove it's yours? And even if she could prove it, even if she showed them Aunt Evelyn's will and the armoire, the scrutiny would destroy any chance of keeping the discovery private. Her siblings would find out. They would challenge the inheritance. They would argue that the cash should have been declared as part of the estate, divided among all of them. And they would probably be right, legally speaking. Sarah didn't know enough about estate law to be certain, but she suspected that hidden assets were still part of an estate, regardless of where they were hidden. The thought of David and Monica learning about the money made her physically ill. She could already hear David's voice, sharp with accusation. She could see Monica's face, twisted with indignation. They would take it from her. They would use lawyers and legal procedures and their connections to people who knew how these things worked. And Sarah, who could barely afford her rent, would have no way to fight back. No, she couldn't tell anyone. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But that left her with an impossible problem. How could she use money she couldn't deposit, couldn't explain, couldn't acknowledge she had? The answer came to her slowly, built from dozens of small realizations over sleepless nights. She couldn't use all of it, not directly. But she could use some of it, carefully, in ways that wouldn't raise alarms. She started small. Very small. The check engine light in her car had been on for a month. Sarah had been ignoring it because she couldn't afford to find out what was wrong. Now she took the car to a mechanic, a small independent shop on the edge of town. When the mechanic told her the repair would cost $800, Sarah didn't flinch. She paid in cash, counting out $800 bills from her purse. The mechanic raised his eyebrows slightly but didn't comment. Cash was unusual but not illegal. He gave her a receipt, and Sarah drove away with a car that ran smoothly for the first time in months. The relief was almost overwhelming. Such a small thing. Such a simple fix. But for years, that $800 had been an impossible barrier, a problem she couldn't solve. Now it was just done. Handled. Erased with bills pulled from a hidden compartment. She paid the rent early for the first time ever. The landlord, Mr. Henderson, accepted the cash without question. He probably assumed she'd gotten a tax refund or a bonus at work. People paid rent in cash all the time. She bought groceries without checking prices, without calculating every item, without putting things back at the register because the total was too high. The checkout clerk didn't notice anything unusual. Sarah paid with a $100 bill and pocketed the change. Normal. Unremarkable. She bought Emma new clothes, not from the thrift store, but from an actual department store, with tags that weren't marked down or stained. Emma's eyes went wide when Sarah handed her the bags. "Mom, this is too much," Emma said, pulling out a jacket that actually fit properly, that looked new because it was new. "You needed a coat," Sarah replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "And shoes. And jeans that don't have holes. But how? I picked up extra shifts." The lie came easily now. She'd been practicing it. "It's fine, sweetheart. You deserve nice things." Emma hugged her, and Sarah held on tightly, fighting back tears. This was what the money could do. This was what it meant. Not luxury or excess, just basic dignity. The ability to provide for her daughter without constant calculation and compromise. But she had to be careful. So careful. People noticed when someone's circumstances changed too dramatically. Co-workers asked questions. Neighbors paid attention. Sarah couldn't suddenly start living like she'd won the lottery. She had to maintain the appearance of struggle while slowly, quietly improving their situation. It was harder than she'd imagined. Every day at the grocery store, she rang up customers who bought whatever they wanted without thinking about it. She watched them pay with credit cards that cleared instantly, never worrying about declined transactions or insufficient funds. And she had to stand there, smiling her customer service smile, pretending she was still one of the struggling masses while $3 million sat hidden in her apartment. The pretending wore on her. She caught herself making comments about being broke, about how expensive everything was, and the words felt like lies now. But they had to be lies. She couldn't afford the truth. 3 weeks after finding the money, Sarah's transmission on her car started slipping. The mechanic told her it would need to be replaced soon. $3,000, maybe more. In her old life, that would have been catastrophic. She would have driven the dying car until it completely broke down, then scrambled to find a way to get to work. Now she paid for the transmission in cash. The mechanic asked if she wanted a payment plan, and Sarah said no. She'd prefer to handle it all at once. He seemed surprised but pleased. Cash customers were rare and valuable. Sarah drove home with a car that worked perfectly, and she cried in the parking lot of her apartment building. Not from sadness, from the sheer overwhelm of having problems that could actually be solved. But with each repair, each purchase, each small improvement, she felt the weight of secrecy growing heavier. She was living a double life now. Working-class Sarah, who struggled to pay bills, and hidden Sarah, who had more money than she could spend in a lifetime. The contradiction was exhausting. Emma handled it better than Sarah did. At 11, she possessed an adaptability that adults lost somewhere along the way. She wore her new clothes to school without making a fuss. She didn't brag to friends about suddenly having nice things. She understood, instinctively, that the money was a secret that needed protecting. "It's like we're undercover," Emma said one evening, helping Sarah make dinner. "Like we're pretending to be poor even though we're not." "We're not pretending," Sarah corrected gently. "We still need to be careful. The money doesn't change who we are." "Doesn't it, though?" Emma looked at her seriously. "I mean, we're different now. We don't have to worry the same way." Sarah didn't have an answer to that. Emma was right. They were different. The constant anxiety that had defined Sarah's adult life had loosened its grip. She still worked 2 jobs, still went through the motions of her previous existence. but the desperation was gone. She knew, even if no one else did, that she had options now. Security. A way out if she needed it. The knowledge changed everything, even when nothing visible changed at all. A month after the discovery, Sarah received a call from Mr. Whitmore, Aunt Evelyn's lawyer. Her heart stopped when she saw his name on the caller ID. Had someone found out? Had the bank reported something? Had her siblings noticed? "Sarah," Mr. Whitmore said when she answered, his voice warm and professional. "I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. I wanted to follow up regarding your aunt's estate. Have you claimed the Armoire yet?" Sarah's throat was dry. "Yes, a few weeks ago." "Wonderful. I'm calling because I've been going through Evelyn's papers more thoroughly, and I found something I thought you should have." He paused. "A letter. She left it in a sealed envelope with your name on it. I don't know what it contains, but she was very specific that you should receive it after taking possession of the Armoire." Sarah's hands began to shake. "A letter?" "Yes. Would you be able to stop by my office to collect it?" Yes. "When?" "Whenever is convenient for you." "Tomorrow?" "This week?" "Tomorrow. I can come tomorrow." That night, Sarah barely slept. A letter. Aunt Evelyn had left her a letter. Did it explain the money? Did it provide instructions or warnings or some kind of justification for the fortune hidden in the furniture? By morning, Sarah's nerves were frayed to breaking. She called in sick to the grocery store again, knowing she was using up goodwill she couldn't afford to lose, but unable to wait. Emma was at school. The apartment was quiet as Sarah dressed carefully, as if preparing for something important. As if the letter might somehow change everything again. Mr. Whitmore's office looked the same as it had during the will reading. Same thick carpets, same paintings on the walls. But this time, Sarah walked in feeling different. Not defeated. Not ashamed. Just uncertain about what came next. "Sarah." Mr. Whitmore stood and shook her hand. "Thank you for coming so quickly. Please, sit." He retrieved an envelope from his desk drawer. It was cream-colored, expensive-looking, with Sarah's name written across the front in elegant cursive. Aunt Evelyn's handwriting. Sarah recognized it from old birthday cards she'd received as a child. "She left this with very specific instructions," Mr. Whitmore said, handing it to her. "You were to receive it only after claiming the Armoire. I don't know what it says, but Evelyn was quite emphatic that you read it in private." Sarah took the envelope with trembling fingers. "Thank you." "Sarah." Mr. Whitmore's expression softened. "Evelyn spoke very highly of you in our meetings. She said you were the only one in the family who understood the value of things that couldn't be bought or sold. I think she would have been pleased to know the Armoire went to someone who would appreciate it." Sarah couldn't speak around the lump in her throat. She nodded, tucked the envelope into her purse, and left. She drove to a park on the far side of town, somewhere she'd never been before, where no one knew her. She sat on a bench overlooking a small pond and opened the envelope with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Inside were 3 handwritten pages, the same elegant script she'd seen on the envelope. Sarah unfolded them and began to read. "My dear Sarah, if you're reading this, then you've taken the Armoire home. You've probably endured mockery from your siblings, who never understood the difference between price and value. And if you've been as curious as I hope you've been, you've discovered what I left hidden inside. I imagine you have questions. The first is probably, where did the money come from? The answer is both simple and complicated. It's mine. I earned it, saved it, and chose to hide it rather than let it be consumed by an estate system designed to distribute everything according to rules that don't account for love or understanding. Let me explain. 60 years ago, when I was 18, I met a man named Robert Chen. He was a Chinese immigrant, brilliant and ambitious. who'd come to this country with nothing and built a successful import business. We fell in love. In 1965, we married in secret because my family would never have accepted him. Your grandfather was a hard man with firm beliefs about who was worthy and who wasn't. Robert was not white. Therefore, in your grandfather's eyes, he was not worthy. We kept our marriage hidden for 5 years. Robert's business grew steadily. We traveled. We built a life together in the margins of society where interracial couples could exist. We were happy. And then Robert died in a car accident. He was only 28. I inherited his business. His family had disowned him for marrying outside their culture, so I was his sole beneficiary. I was 23 years old and suddenly responsible for a company I barely understood. Your grandfather demanded I sell it immediately, return to the family, and marry someone appropriate. I refused. Instead, I learned the business. I worked harder than I'd ever worked in my life. And over the next 40 years, I turned Robert's modest import company into something substantial. I sold it in 2005 for $18 million. The money I left hidden in the Armoire is what remains after 40 years of living comfortably, but carefully. I paid my taxes. I donated to charities. I lived in my house and collected my furniture, and never wanted for anything. But I also never told anyone about the extent of my wealth. Not your father. Not his siblings. Not anyone. Why? Because I learned early that money changes how people see you. It changes what they expect from you. And I valued my privacy, my autonomy, more than I valued the approval of a family that never understood me. I'm leaving the cash to you specifically, Sarah, because I see myself in you. You married young, against better judgment perhaps, and it didn't work out. You've struggled. You've been dismissed by people who should have supported you. You've watched your siblings succeed in conventional ways while you've fought just to survive. But you've never given up. You've worked yourself to exhaustion for your daughter. You've maintained your dignity even when others offered you none. You've understood, as I once did, that some things matter more than money, like integrity, like love, like showing up for the people who need you. This money is yours, Sarah, not David's, not Monica's, not the government's. It's yours to use however you see fit. And I hid it because I knew that if it were distributed through normal channels, your siblings would find ways to take it from you. They would use lawyers and procedures and their connections to ensure you got as little as possible. I couldn't let that happen. So I hid my wealth in plain sight, in a piece of furniture everyone else would dismiss as junk. I knew you'd take it. I knew you wouldn't sell it immediately like they would. And I suspected, hoped, that you or your daughter would eventually discover what I'd hidden inside. Now for the practical matters. The money is legally yours. It came from the sale of my business, which was properly documented and taxed decades ago. I kept it as cash because I preferred having it accessible and private. There's nothing illegal about possessing cash, though I understand it creates complications in today's banking system. I can't tell you how to handle it. That's your decision. But I can tell you what I learned over my years of having more money than people knew. The secret to wealth is not spending it all at once. It's not showing it off. It's using it quietly, carefully, to build security and opportunities that don't draw attention. You can't deposit large amounts without triggering reports, but you can pay cash for things. You can make careful investments through intermediaries. You can improve your life in small, sustainable ways that don't advertise what you have. Most importantly, you can give Emma the kind of childhood you never had, the kind I never had. One where money isn't a constant source of anxiety and shame. Be careful, Sarah. Your siblings will resent any improvement in your circumstances. They're comfortable when you're struggling because it confirms their belief that they're better, smarter, more deserving than you. Don't give them ammunition. Don't let them know what you've found until you're ready to defend it. And when the time comes, when you do have to reveal what you have, stand firm. This is yours. I gave it to you because you deserve it. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Live well, my dear. Give Emma my love. And remember that sometimes the greatest treasures are the ones everyone else overlooks. With all my affection, Aunt Evelyn. Sarah read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. The words blurred together, but their meaning remained crystal clear. Aunt Evelyn had known exactly what she was doing. She'd planned this, orchestrated it, made sure that Sarah, and only Sarah, would receive the wealth she'd spent a lifetime accumulating. The money wasn't random. It wasn't luck. It was love. A deliberate act of care from one woman who'd been dismissed and underestimated to another who lived the same experience every day. Sarah sat on that park bench for over an hour, holding the letter, letting its implications settle into her bones. She'd been terrified that the money was illegal, that claiming it would destroy her life. But Aunt Evelyn had earned it legitimately. She'd hidden it not from the law, but from family members who would have taken it from Sarah through legal means. The realization was both freeing and infuriating. Aunt Evelyn had understood exactly how David and Monica operated. She'd known they would fight any inheritance that favored Sarah, and so she'd outmaneuvered them, using their own dismissive assumptions against them. They'd looked at the Armoire and seen junk. They'd looked at Sarah and seen failure. Neither judgment had been accurate, and now their blindness had cost them millions of dollars. Sarah carefully folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. She tucked it deep into her purse, next to the small amount of cash she'd started carrying. Then she drove home, her mind clearer than it had been in weeks. She had permission now. Not just legal permission, though the letter helped establish that, but emotional permission. Aunt Evelyn had given her blessing, had told Sarah explicitly that she deserved this money and should use it without guilt. That evening, Sarah sat Emma down at the kitchen table. "I got a letter from Aunt Evelyn today," Sarah said. "About the Armoire." Emma's eyes widened. Did she know about the money? She hid it there, on purpose, for us. Sarah pulled out the letter and handed it to Emma, who read it slowly, her expression shifting from confusion to wonder to something like pride. "She was married to someone from China," Emma said when she finished. "Apparently. And she ran a business for 40 years. She was incredible, Emma. And she wanted us to have this money because she believed we'd use it wisely. Are we going to tell Uncle David and Aunt Monica?" "Not yet. Maybe not ever. Aunt Evelyn was right about them. If they knew, they'd try to take it. And I'm not going to let that happen." Emma nodded slowly. "So what do we do?" "We use it carefully. We improve our lives without advertising what we have. We save most of it. We invest some of it. And we make sure you have opportunities I never had." "Like what?" Sarah had been thinking about this constantly since finding the money. "Like a good education. Not just public school, but maybe private school if you want it. Or tutoring. Or college without worrying about student loans. Like music lessons if you want to learn an instrument. Like travel, so you can see the world. Like whatever dreams you have that I could never help you achieve before." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "I don't need all that, Mom. I just need you to not be so tired all the time." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She pulled Emma into a hug, holding her daughter while they both cried. "I know, baby. I know. And things are going to change. I promise." That week, Sarah made her first major decision. She quit her second job, the office cleaning position that kept her out until midnight. Her supervisor seemed surprised, but not suspicious. People quit all the time in that industry. The turnover was constant. Sarah gave 2 weeks' notice, worked her final shifts, and collected her last paycheck. Coming home at 7 in the evening instead of midnight felt revolutionary. She had time to make real dinners, time to help Emma with homework, time to sit on the couch and watch television without falling asleep from exhaustion. She kept her job at the grocery store. Quitting both jobs at once would raise questions, and she needed to maintain some visible source of income. But having her evenings back changed everything. She felt human again, present in her own life instead of sleepwalking through it. Emma thrived with her mother home more often. She smiled more and talked more, seemed lighter somehow. Sarah realized with painful clarity how much her constant absence had affected her daughter. All those years of working herself to death, she'd thought she was providing. But what Emma had needed most was simply her presence. Money, Sarah thought, bought time. And time was the real treasure. She began making plans. Careful, long-term plans that wouldn't draw attention, but would fundamentally alter their trajectory. First priority, moving to a better apartment. Not immediately. That would be suspicious. But in 6 months or a year, she could claim she'd saved up enough for a security deposit on a nicer place. Somewhere with 2 real bedrooms, windows that didn't stick, a kitchen with appliances that worked. Nothing extravagant, just decent. Second priority, Emma's education. When Sarah researched private schools in the area, looking at tuition costs and admission requirements. Most were beyond what she could claim to afford, even with careful budgeting. But there were scholarship programs, financial aid options. If she could make it look like they qualified for assistance while privately paying the difference in cash, Emma could attend a school that would actually prepare her for college. Third priority, investing. Sarah knew nothing about stocks or bonds or retirement accounts, but she was learning, reading everything she could find about how to turn cash into legitimate, accessible wealth. The problem was that most investment opportunities required depositing money into accounts, which brought her back to the original problem of explaining where the cash came from. She needed help, professional help from someone who wouldn't ask too many questions. 4 months after discovering the money, Sarah finally worked up the courage to seek out a financial advisor. She chose a small firm on the edge of town, the kind of place that dealt with ordinary people, not wealthy clients with complex portfolios. She made an appointment, claiming she'd received a small inheritance and wanted advice on managing it. The advisor, a woman in her 40s named Christine Park, greeted her warmly. "How can I help you today?" Sarah had rehearsed this. "My aunt died and left me some money. Not a lot, but more than I've ever had. I want to make sure I use it wisely for my daughter's future." "That's very responsible. How much are we talking about?" "Around 50,000. The lie came smoothly. She couldn't claim the full amount. But 50,000 was plausible. An inheritance that size wouldn't shock anyone. Christine nodded, making notes. "And how did you receive the funds? Check? Direct transfer?" "Cash, actually. My aunt was old-fashioned. She kept money at home." Christine's pen paused briefly, then continued. "I see. Well, you'll want to deposit that into a bank account before we can invest it. Have you done that yet?" "Not yet. I wasn't sure how to handle it. Is there a problem with depositing cash?" "Not necessarily. But banks have reporting requirements for large cash deposits. Anything over $10,000 gets reported to the IRS. It's nothing to worry about if the money is legitimate, which yours clearly is. You'll just need to be prepared to explain where it came from." Sarah's stomach tightened. "What kind of explanation?" "Just documentation. A copy of the will, perhaps. A letter from the estate lawyer. Something that establishes the money came from an inheritance. The bank needs to verify it's not from illegal activity." "But it's my money. My aunt left it to me." "Of course. and the documentation will prove that. Once you have your paperwork in order, you can deposit it, and we can start building a portfolio for you. I'd recommend a diversified approach, some stable investments for security, some growth investments for long-term gains. Sarah left the meeting with her head spinning. Documentation. Proof. Verification. Always more hoops to jump through. More ways the system prevented people like her from simply having what they'd been given. She couldn't use Mr. Whitmore as a reference, and he would know immediately that $50,000 wasn't part of the will. And she couldn't claim a larger inheritance without David and Monica finding out and demanding their share. The system was designed to make cash difficult to legitimize. She could see that now. In a world of digital transactions and paper trails, physical money existed in a kind of legal twilight. Not illegal, but suspect. Not forbidden, but complicated. She needed a different approach. Over the following weeks, Sarah developed a strategy. She would deposit small amounts periodically, claiming she'd been saving aggressively from her paychecks. $1,000 here, $2,000 there. Never enough to trigger reporting requirements. Never enough to seem suspicious. It would take years to legitimize even a fraction of the money this way. But at least it would give her accessible funds she could use for things that required bank accounts. The rest would remain hidden, a safety net, an emergency fund that could be accessed if disaster struck. She opened a savings account at a different bank than her regular checking account. Over 2 months, she deposited small amounts until the balance reached $15,000. When the teller asked about the cash deposits, Sarah explained she'd been saving tips from her retail job and finally felt comfortable putting them in the bank. The explanation was accepted without question. Poor people saved cash at home all the time. It wasn't unusual. With $15,000 in accessible funds, Sarah felt a weight lift. She had buffer now. Security. If Emma got sick, if the car broke down again, if any emergency arose, when she could handle it without panic. She also started planning the move. She found an apartment complex on the better side of town, the kind of place with a playground and a small fitness center and doors that locked properly. The rent was $800 more than her current place, a number that would have been completely impossible 6 months ago. Now it was manageable if she budgeted carefully and supplemented her visible income with strategic cash payments. She applied for the apartment, providing her employment information and banking statements that showed enough savings to cover the security deposit and first month's rent. The application was approved. Move-in date, 6 weeks. Sarah told Emma that night. "We're moving." Emma looked up from her homework, startled. "Moving where?" "Somewhere better. Somewhere you'll have your own bathroom, somewhere safe. How can we afford that?" "I've been saving, and I got a small raise at work." Another lie, but necessary. "We're going to be okay, Emma. Things are getting better." Emma threw her arms around Sarah's neck. "Really? We're really moving?" "Really." That night, lying in bed, Sarah thought about Aunt Evelyn's letter. "Live well, my dear." She was trying, carefully, quietly, without drawing attention. But she was building something new from the foundation her aunt had given her. A life where Emma didn't have to grow up feeling poor, feeling less than, feeling like opportunity was something that happened to other people. The money was changing them, not in dramatic ways visible to outsiders, but in small, from fundamental shifts that rewrote the story of who they were and what they could become. Sarah allowed herself, for the first time in years, to feel hope. Not the desperate, clawing hope of someone drowning and reaching for anything that might save them, but calm, steady hope, grounded in the reality of having resources, having options, having a future that extended beyond just surviving until tomorrow. She thought about her siblings, dividing Aunt Evelyn's official estate, probably already spending their shares. They had no idea what they'd lost by dismissing the Armoire. No idea that their mockery had cost them millions. Sarah didn't feel guilty about that. She felt, if she was honest with herself, a fierce satisfaction. They'd underestimated her. They'd treated her like she was worthless. When now she had something they would never have, something they couldn't take from her, because they didn't even know it existed. The vindication was silent, but absolute. Moving day arrived on a Saturday in late spring. Sarah had hired movers this time, paid them in cash. They loaded the furniture efficiently, including the massive armoire, which took 4 men to carry down the stairs. Sarah watched them work, making sure they were careful with every piece, but especially with the armoire. "That's solid wood," one of the movers commented, running his hand over the carved surface. "They don't make them like this anymore. Probably worth a fortune." "It was my aunt's," Sarah said simply. "It means a lot to me." The new apartment was everything the old one wasn't. Bright, clean, spacious. Emma ran from room to room, on her excitement infectious. Her bedroom was twice the size of her old one, with a real closet and 2 windows that looked out over the courtyard. They set up the armoire in Emma's new room. It looked different here, in a space that matched its dignity. Not a relic surviving in poverty, but a piece of furniture finally placed somewhere it belonged. That night, in their new home, Sarah made dinner in a kitchen with a full-size refrigerator and a stove where all 4 burners worked. Emma set the table with plates that matched, purchased specifically for the occasion. They ate together, talking about school and plans for the summer and all the small, ordinary things that felt extraordinary, because they were happening here, in this place they'd earned through Aunt Evelyn's gift and Sarah's careful stewardship of it. After Emma went to bed, when Sarah stood in the living room of their new apartment, looking around at the space they now occupied, it wasn't luxurious. It wasn't even particularly impressive by most standards. But it was clean and safe, and theirs. And it represented the first visible change in their circumstances, the first evidence that something fundamental had shifted. She thought about calling her siblings, telling them about the move, but she decided against it. They would ask questions. They would want to know how she could afford this. And Sarah wasn't ready to answer those questions. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Let them wonder. Let them make assumptions. The truth was hers to keep or reveal as she chose. For now, for tonight, Sarah simply stood in her new living room and let herself feel the full weight of what had happened. She had been given a gift she'd never imagined possible. And she was using it, carefully and wisely, to build a life worth living. Aunt Evelyn's fortune had been hidden in plain sight, wrapped in assumptions about worthlessness and failure. But Sarah had looked closer, had cared enough to discover what others missed. And now she was building her own kind of treasure, not hidden in furniture or bank accounts, but visible in Emma's smile, in their safe home, in the space and time and security they'd never had before. The armoire stood in Emma's room, keeping its secrets. And Sarah stood in her living room, beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, she deserved this after all. The new apartment became home faster than Sarah had expected. Within weeks, the space transformed from empty rooms into a place filled with their presence. Emma decorated her bedroom with posters and string lights. Sarah bought a small kitchen table where they ate breakfast together every morning before school and work. The armoire stood sentinel in Emma's room, its secret safely hidden behind carved wood and false panels. For 3 months, life continued in this new, improved rhythm. Sarah worked her single job at the grocery store, came home at reasonable hours, and spent evenings with Emma. They cooked together, watched movies, did homework at the kitchen table. Simple things that had been impossible when Sarah worked herself to exhaustion across 2 jobs. The money remained mostly untouched. Sarah had legitimized about $30,000 through careful deposits over time, building a savings account that gave her breathing room. But the vast majority of the fortune still sat hidden in the armoire, a secret that belonged only to her and Emma. Until the day Monica showed up unannounced. It was a Saturday afternoon in September. Emma was at a friend's house, and Sarah was cleaning the apartment when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, she saw her sister standing in the hallway, looking polished and irritated in equal measure. Sarah's stomach dropped. Monica had never visited before, never even asked for the address of the old apartment. This was deliberate. This was something. Sarah opened the door, keeping her expression neutral. Monica, this is a surprise. Monica's eyes swept past her, taking in the apartment's interior. Can I come in? Of course. Sarah stepped aside, her heart beginning to pound. Monica walked into the living room with the assessing gaze of someone calculating value. She looked at the furniture, most of it secondhand, but clean and functional. She looked at the windows, the walls, the space itself. Sarah could see her sister's mind working, adding up what this apartment must cost. Nice place, Monica said, the words carrying an edge. When did you move? A few months ago. The old apartment was getting too small for Emma. Must have been expensive. This is a good neighborhood. We manage. Monica turned to face her fully. Sarah, I'm going to be direct. David and I have been talking. We're concerned about you. Concerned? Sarah kept her voice even. About what? About your finances. About how you're suddenly able to afford a place like this when 6 months ago you were complaining about not being able to fix your car. Monica crossed her arms. Where did you get the money, Sarah? I work. I save. It's not that complicated. Don't insult my intelligence. This apartment has to be at least $1,200 a month, probably more. You work at a grocery store. The math doesn't work. Sarah felt her pulse quicken, but she forced herself to remain calm. I quit my second job. That freed up time to budget better. And I got a small raise. A raise? Monica's tone dripped with skepticism. Big enough to double your rent? I don't see how this is any of your business. It becomes my business when I think you might have done something with Aunt Evelyn's estate that wasn't disclosed. Monica's eyes narrowed. So did she give you money we don't know about? Did you find something when you cleaned out that armoire? Sarah's blood ran cold. This was it. The confrontation she'd known was coming, but hoped to delay indefinitely. The will was public record. You know exactly what I got. The will listed assets that were declared. But Aunt Evelyn was eccentric. She could have hidden cash, jewelry, something valuable you're not telling us about. She left me a piece of furniture, Monica, that's all. Then how do you explain this? Monica gestured around the apartment. The new clothes Emma's been wearing, the working car, the fact that you're not constantly broke anymore? I'm managing better. That's all there is to it. Monica stepped closer, her voice lowering to something almost threatening. If you found money, Sarah, it's part of the estate. It should have been divided equally. If you're hiding assets, that's illegal. David and I can challenge this. We can get lawyers involved. Sarah felt anger rising, hot and bright. Years of being dismissed, mocked, treated as less than. Years of watching her siblings take and take while she scraped by. All of it coalesced into a fury that burned away her fear. Get out! Monica blinked. What? Get out of my apartment, now! Sarah, I'm trying to help! You're trying to take from me. Again. Like you always do. But this time, there's nothing to take. I got a piece of furniture you all call junk. That's what's in the will. That's what I have. Sarah moved toward the door, opening it. Leave! Monica's face flushed with anger. This isn't over. David's going to hear about this. And if we find out you're hiding something, then what? You'll sue me? Go ahead. I have nothing to hide. Monica left, her heels clicking sharply against the hallway floor. Sarah closed the door and leaned against it, her legs shaking. She'd won that round, but it wasn't over. Monica would tell David. They would investigate. They would start asking questions Sarah didn't want to answer. She needed to prepare. That night, after Emma came home, Sarah sat her down and explained what had happened. "Aunt Monica knows something's different," Sarah said. "She's suspicious. Your Uncle David is going to be too. They're going to start paying more attention to us." Emma's face paled. "What do? We be careful. We don't talk about money with anyone. We keep living the way we have been, and if they push too hard." Sarah thought of Aunt Evelyn's letter, still hidden in her nightstand drawer. "I have proof that the money is ours, but I don't want to use it unless I have to. Because they'll be really mad. Because they'll try to take it anyway. Even if they can't legally, they'll make our lives difficult." Sarah pulled Emma into a hug. "But don't worry, sweetheart. We're going to be okay. Aunt Evelyn made sure of that." 2 weeks later, David called. Sarah was at work when her phone rang, his name flashing on the screen. She almost didn't answer, but ignoring him would only make things worse. "David." "Sarah, we need to talk. Monica told me about your new apartment. It's a nice place. Emma loves it. I'm sure she does. Sarah, I'm going to be frank with you. Your financial situation has changed dramatically, and the timing is suspicious. You moved into a better apartment just months after Aunt Evelyn died. That's not a coincidence. I saved money. I improved my circumstances. That's called being responsible. Or it's called hiding assets from an estate. Sarah, if you found something valuable in that armoire, you need to disclose it. I've spoken with a lawyer. If you're concealing property that should have been part of the estate distribution, we can take legal action." Sarah felt her jaw tighten. "Take legal action then, but you won't find anything because there's nothing to find. I want to see the armoire." The request hung in the air, dangerous and direct. Sarah's mind raced. Why? Because if there was something hidden in it, there might be evidence. Secret compartments, concealed spaces. I want an expert to examine it. It's a piece of furniture, David, that's all. Then you won't mind if someone takes a look. Sarah's anger flared. Actually, I do mind. It's mine. Aunt Evelyn left it to me. You have no right to it. I have every right if it's being used to hide assets that should have been distributed equally. You got your inheritance, David. So did Monica. Be satisfied with that. This isn't about satisfaction. It's about fairness. And if you're hiding something, Sarah, I will find out. He hung up before she could respond. Sarah stood in the break room of the grocery store, her hands trembling. They were closing in. David wouldn't let this go. He would push and investigate and demand until he found something or convinced himself there was nothing to find. She needed help. Real help. That evening, Sarah called Mr. Whitmore. "Mr. Whitmore, I'm sorry to bother you, but I have a legal question about Aunt Evelyn's estate." "Of course, Sarah. What's on your mind?" She explained the situation carefully. The suspicions, David's threats, the demand to examine the armoire. "If they force their way into my apartment or try to take the furniture, do they have that right?" Mr. Whitmore was quiet for a moment. "The will was executed properly. The armoire was specifically bequeathed to you. Once you took possession, it became your property. Your siblings have no legal claim to it unless they can prove fraud or concealment, which would require substantial evidence." "What if they get a court order?" "They'd need to demonstrate probable cause that you're concealing estate assets. Simply moving to a better apartment isn't enough. However," he paused. "Sarah, did you find something in the armoire? Something Evelyn left for you?" Sarah hesitated. Mr. Whitmore had given her the letter. He'd been Aunt Evelyn's trusted advisor for years. If anyone could help, it was him. "Yes," she said quietly. I found money. A lot of money. And a letter from Aunt Evelyn explaining that she'd hidden it there for me specifically. I see. Mr. Whitmore's voice was carefully neutral. How much money? Over $3 million. The silence stretched long. That's substantial. And the letter explains the origin of the funds. Yes. She sold her business years ago. This is what she saved. She hid it because she knew if it went through normal channels, David and Monica would find ways to claim most of it. She wasn't wrong about that. Mr. Whitmore sighed. Sarah, this puts you in a complicated position. Technically, hidden assets should be declared as part of an estate. However, if Evelyn specifically bequeathed the armoire and its contents to you, and she had legal ownership of the funds, there's an argument that the money is rightfully yours. An argument, not a certainty. Nothing in law is certain when family members dispute inheritance. But if you have documentation, Evelyn's letter explaining her intentions, that would carry significant weight. The question is whether you want to fight this battle publicly or find another way. What other way is there? You could offer a settlement, a portion of the money, in exchange for their agreement not to contest the rest. It's not ideal, but it would avoid litigation. Sarah felt sick at the thought. Give them money that Aunt Evelyn specifically didn't want them to have. It's a pragmatic solution to a difficult situation. No. The word came out harder than she intended. No. Aunt Evelyn gave this to me. She explained why. I'm not going to betray that just because David and Monica are greedy. Then you may need to prepare for a legal battle. And Sarah, I should tell you, I represented Evelyn's estate. I can't represent you in a dispute with your siblings. It would be a conflict of interest. I understand. But you can tell me what I need to do to protect myself? Document everything. Keep the letter safe. If they sue, you'll need to prove Evelyn's intentions and the legal origin of the funds. And Sarah, be prepared for this to get ugly. Family disputes over money always do. After they hung up, Sarah sat at her kitchen table, staring at nothing. She'd known this might happen, had prepared for it mentally. But facing the reality was different than imagining it. The next day, while Emma was at school, Sarah made copies of Aunt Evelyn's letter. She kept the original locked in a safe deposit box she'd rented specifically for important documents. The copies she stored in 3 different locations: her apartment, her locker at work, with a friend who'd agreed to hold an envelope without asking questions. She photographed every page of the letter with her phone and backed the images up to secure cloud storage. She documented the dates she'd moved, the jobs she'd worked, every plausible source of income that could explain her improved circumstances without revealing the full truth. She was preparing for war, and she hated it. For hated that money, which should have been a blessing, was turning into a source of conflict. Hated that her siblings cared more about what they could take from her than about the relationship they'd never really had. But she wouldn't give up. Couldn't give up. This was Emma's future. This was the security Aunt Evelyn had wanted them to have, and Sarah would fight for it. The confrontation came 3 weeks later. David had apparently hired a private investigator who'd been following Sarah, documenting her spending, photographing her apartment building, building a case that her lifestyle exceeded her means. Sarah came home from work to find David and Monica waiting in the lobby of her apartment building. The manager must have let them in, despite Sarah's instructions that no one should access the building without her permission. "So, Sarah," David said, standing as she entered, "we need to talk. I have nothing to say to you. Then you'll listen." He held up a folder thick with papers. "I have documentation here showing that your monthly expenses exceed your reported income by at least $800. I have photographs of your new furniture, Emma's new clothes, your repaired car. You've spent thousands of dollars in the past 6 months that you can't account for. How I spend my money is none of your business. It is when that money came from our aunt's estate. Monica stepped forward, her expression cold. You found something, Sarah. We know you did. And you've been hiding it from us. The only thing I found was the furniture you all mocked, the junk you said wasn't worth hauling away. Then let us see it, David demanded. Let us bring in an expert to examine it. If there's nothing hidden, you have nothing to worry about. Sarah felt her control slipping. You want to see it? Fine. Come up. She led them to her apartment, her heart pounding with every step. She was calling their bluff, or maybe she was ready for this to end. Either way, the confrontation had arrived, and running from it wouldn't make it disappear. Inside the apartment, she led them to Emma's bedroom. The armoire stood against the wall, as imposing and beautiful as ever. David walked around it, examining the wood, the carvings, the structure. It's big, he admitted. Decent craftsmanship, but nothing special. Maybe worth a few thousand at most. That's what you said before. Sarah crossed her arms. So why are you here? Because I think there's something inside it. Or there was. Sought a hidden compartment, maybe, where Aunt Evelyn stashed something valuable. Then look. David pulled open the doors. The interior was filled with Emma's clothes, neatly folded on shelves. He began removing items, stacking them on the bed. Monica helped, both of them rifling through Emma's belongings with the kind of entitlement that made Sarah's skin crawl. They examined every shelf, every corner. They knocked on the wood, listening for hollow sounds. They measured the interior dimensions and compared them to the exterior. And Sarah watched, her expression calm, while her heart raced. They were close. So close to discovering the hidden panels. But they didn't know about the carved roses. They didn't know the specific trigger points. They were looking, but they couldn't see. After 30 minutes, David stepped back, frustrated. There's something off about the dimensions. The interior is smaller than it should be. Old furniture is built thick, Sarah said. That's why it lasts. Or there are hidden compartments. He pressed his hands against the interior walls, searching for release mechanisms. Monica did the same on the other side. Sarah held her breath. One of them could stumble on the roses by accident, could press the right spot and reveal everything. But luck, or perhaps fate, kept them from the exact locations that would unlock the truth. After another 20 minutes, David finally gave up. Fine, there's nothing here. But that doesn't explain your finances, Sarah. I don't owe you an explanation. You do if you're using money that should have been distributed among all of us. I'm not. Sarah met his eyes steadily. When Aunt Evelyn left me the armoire, that's what I have. Nothing more. Then how do you afford this place? I budget, I work, I make different choices than I used to. That's my right. Monica's eyes narrowed. You're lying. I can see it. You found something. Believe what you want. But unless you have actual proof, you need to leave my apartment. Now. David looked like he wanted to argue further, but even he could see they'd crossed a line. They'd searched her home, invaded her privacy, torn through her daughter's bedroom. Going further would require legal action they couldn't yet justify. This isn't over, David said as they left. We're going to find out the truth. And when we do, Sarah, you're going to regret hiding it. After they left, Sarah sank onto Emma's bed, surrounded by clothes her siblings had pulled from the armoire. Her hands were shaking, but she felt a strange sense of triumph. They'd looked, they'd searched, and they'd found nothing. But she knew David wouldn't give up. He would hire more investigators. He would look for bank records, spending patterns, anything that could prove she had money she shouldn't have. The pressure would continue to build until something broke. That night, after Emma came home and they'd cleaned up the bedroom together, Sarah made a decision. She couldn't live under this constant threat. Couldn't spend the rest of her life looking over her shoulder, waiting for her siblings to discover the truth. It was time to stop hiding. She called a lawyer the next morning, not Mr. Whitmore, but someone who specialized in inheritance disputes. She explained the situation completely: the hidden money, Aunt Evelyn's letter, her siblings' suspicions and threats. The lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia Reeves, listened without interruption. When Sarah finished, Patricia leaned back in her chair. "You have several options," Patricia said. "First, you can continue as you are, using the money carefully and hoping they never find definitive proof. Second, you can settle with them, offering a portion in exchange for their agreement to drop the matter. Third, you can go on offense, declare the money, claim it as yours under the will, and fight them in court if they contest it. What would you recommend? Honestly? The third option. You have Evelyn's letter explaining her intentions. You have documentation that the money came from legitimate sources she'd earned decades ago. The fact that she hid it doesn't make it illegal. And the longer you wait, the worse this looks if it ever does come to light. But if I declare it now, they'll definitely sue. Probably. But you'll be controlling the narrative. You'll be showing that you have nothing to hide, that the money is rightfully yours, and that you're willing to defend that position. It's a stronger stance than waiting for them to uncover something and accuse you of concealment." Sarah thought about it for a long moment. Going public meant a fight, meant potential court battles, legal fees, family relationships damaged beyond repair. But those relationships were already damaged, and living in constant fear of discovery was its own kind of prison. "Let's do it," Sarah said. "Let's file whatever needs to be filed to establish my claim to the inheritance." Patricia nodded. "I'll draft a petition to the probate court. We'll disclose the found assets, provide Evelyn's letter as evidence of her intentions, and request a determination that the funds are properly yours under the will. Your siblings will have the opportunity to contest, which they almost certainly will. But we'll be ready." The legal process moved slowly. Patricia filed the petition, including copies of Aunt Evelyn's letter and documentation of the money's origin from the sale of her business decades ago. The probate court scheduled a hearing. David and Monica were notified and, as predicted, immediately filed a counterpetition claiming the money should have been part of the estate's distribution. The waiting was agony. Sarah went to work, came home, tried to maintain normalcy for Emma's sake. But the tension was constant, a weight pressing down on everything she did. Finally, 6 weeks after Patricia filed the initial petition, the hearing arrived. Sarah sat in the courtroom, Patricia beside her. Across the aisle sat David and Monica with their lawyer, a slick man in an expensive suit. The judge, a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair, reviewed the documents before her. "This is an unusual case," the judge began. "The petitioner, Sarah Mitchell, claims to have discovered substantial cash assets hidden in a piece of furniture bequeathed to her by the deceased, Evelyn Harper. The respondents, David and Monica Mitchell, I argue that these assets should have been included in the estate's inventory and distributed according to the will's general provisions." She looked up. "Ms. Mitchell, please explain how and when you discovered these assets." Sarah stood, her legs unsteady. She'd practiced this. Patricia had coached her. But standing before a judge, with her siblings glaring at her from across the room, was more intimidating than she'd anticipated. "I found the money about 8 months ago," Sarah said. "My daughter noticed that the armoire's interior dimensions didn't match the exterior. We investigated and discovered hidden compartments with false panels. Inside were bundles of cash, totaling approximately $3,260,000. "And you didn't immediately report this discovery?" "No, Your Honor. I was confused and scared. I didn't know if the money was legal or if claiming it would somehow be wrong. I needed time to understand what I'd found." "Why didn't you inform your siblings?" Sarah glanced at David and Monica. "Because my aunt had left me a letter explaining why she'd hidden the money. She specifically wanted me to have it, not them. She knew they would try to take it." The judge's eyebrows rose. "This letter, is it available?" Patricia handed a copy to the bailiff, who delivered it to the judge. The courtroom fell silent while the judge read Aunt Evelyn's words. Sarah watched her face, trying to gauge her reaction. After several minutes, the judge set the letter down. "This is quite detailed. Mrs. Harper explains the origin of the funds, her reasons for hiding them, and her specific intentions regarding their distribution." She looked at David and Monica's lawyer. "Counselor, your response?" The lawyer stood. "Your Honor, while the letter is compelling, it doesn't change the fundamental legal issue. Assets belonging to the deceased at the time of death are part of the estate, regardless of where they were hidden. Mrs. Harper's personal wishes, expressed informally in a letter, cannot supersede probate law. The money should have been inventoried and distributed according to the will. But the will specifically bequeathed the armoire to Ms. Mitchell. The armoire, yes, but hidden cash inside it is a separate asset. If I leave someone a book with $1,000 tucked inside, the beneficiary doesn't automatically own the money. The book and its contents are distinct items under estate law." The judge nodded slowly. "That's one interpretation. Ms. Reeves, your counter-argument." Patricia stood. "Your Honor, the law recognizes that when a container and its contents are bequeathed together, the recipient owns both unless specifically stated otherwise. A jewelry box given to someone includes the jewelry inside. A desk includes documents in its drawers. The armoire was gifted as a complete piece of furniture, including whatever was stored within it. Moreover, Mrs. Harper's letter demonstrates clear intent to convey the money to Ms. Mitchell specifically. The fact that she concealed it doesn't negate her right to dispose of her assets as she wished." The judge turned to David and Monica. "Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell, did you have any knowledge during your aunt's lifetime that she possessed wealth beyond what was declared in the estate?" David stood. "No, Your Honor. We had no idea. She lived modestly. We assumed her estate would be modest as well." "And Ms. Mitchell's financial situation before this discovery, how would you characterize it?" "She was struggling, working multiple jobs, barely getting by. That's why her sudden ability to afford a more expensive apartment raised our suspicions." "I see." The judge made notes. "And if the court determines that the money is rightfully Ms. Mitchell's, what is your concern?" Monica spoke up. "That it's unfair, Your Honor. We're all family. Aunt Evelyn should have divided her assets equally. Instead, she hid money and gave it all to Sarah, while the rest of us got comparatively nothing." "Comparatively nothing? You each received over $60,000 from the house sale and cash assets." "Yes, but compared to $3 million, most inheritances seem modest." The judge's tone was dry. "But estate law doesn't guarantee equality. It enforces the wishes of the deceased, as long as those wishes are legally expressed." She paused, reviewing the documents again. "Here's what troubles me about the respondent's position. Mrs. Harper specifically bequeathed the armoire to Ms. Mitchell, using clear language in her will. She also left a detailed letter explaining that she was giving Ms. Mitchell this particular piece because of what it contained. The letter establishes both intent and awareness. She knew the money was there. She chose to conceal it in furniture she was giving to a specific person. That's not accidental. That's deliberate estate planning, even if unconventional," David's lawyer interjected. "But Your Honor, the letter was never filed with the will. It wasn't part of the official record. Because Mrs. Harper chose to deliver it privately, which is her right. A letter of wishes doesn't have to be filed with a will to be considered in determining the deceased's intentions. The judge set down her pen. I'm going to rule from the bench on this matter. The evidence before me shows that Evelyn Harper earned substantial wealth through legitimate business operations. She chose to keep that wealth in cash for her own reasons. She concealed it in a piece of furniture she specifically bequeathed to Sarah Mitchell, and she left a letter explaining this choice. While the methodology is unusual, the intention is clear. Sarah's heart began to race. Therefore, I find that the money discovered in the armoire is properly part of the bequest to Sarah Mitchell. The armoire and its contents were given as a complete gift. Ms. Mitchell acted appropriately by bringing this matter to the court's attention once she understood the situation. The respondent's petition to redistribute the assets is denied. David shot to his feet. Your Honor, this is completely unjust. Mr. Mitchell, my ruling stands. Your aunt had the right to dispose of her assets as she saw fit. She chose to give this particular asset to your sister. The fact that you disapprove doesn't change the legality of her decision. The gavel came down. Final. Definitive. Sarah felt Patricia's hand on her arm, steadying her. We won, Patricia whispered. It's over. But as they left the courtroom, David and Monica caught up with them in the hallway. David's face was red with fury. This is bullshit, Sarah. You manipulated a senile old woman. Aunt Evelyn wasn't senile, Sarah interrupted, her voice calm but firm. She was sharp until the day she died, and she made a choice. Just because you don't like it doesn't make it wrong. She should have treated us equally. Why? Because you're her nephews? You barely visited her. You called her house a junkyard. You made fun of her collections and her lifestyle. Why would she reward that? Monica stepped forward, her voice tight. And you were so much better? You never visited either. You're right. I didn't visit enough. And I regret that. But Aunt Evelyn saw something in me that she wanted to support. She knew I was struggling. She knew Emma deserved better than what I could give her alone. So she helped us. That's what family does. Family shares, David spat. No, David. Family supports each other. But you've never supported me. You've mocked me, dismissed me, treated me like I was worthless. And now you're angry because someone finally chose me over you. Sarah felt tears burning her eyes, but her voice remained steady. The money is mine. The court said so. Aunt Evelyn wanted it that way. And I'm going to use it to give my daughter the life she deserves. She turned and walked away, Patricia beside her. Behind them, she heard Monica calling after her, but Sarah didn't look back. She'd spent too many years letting her siblings make her feel small. That was over now. Outside the courthouse, Sarah paused on the steps, breathing deeply. The afternoon sun was warm on her face. Cars moved past on the street below. The world continued its rotation, indifferent to the battle that had just been won. You did it, Patricia said. The money is legally yours now. They can't touch it. They'll never forgive me. Probably not. But you didn't need their forgiveness. You needed justice. And you got it. Sarah nodded slowly. She thought about Aunt Evelyn, about the letter and the armoire and the careful planning that had made this possible. Her aunt had understood exactly what would happen. She'd known David and Monica would fight, would challenge, would try to take what wasn't theirs. And she'd prepared for it, leaving Sarah the tools she needed to defend her inheritance. Thank you, Sarah said to Patricia, for everything. You're welcome. Now go home. Celebrate with your daughter. Enjoy what your aunt gave you. Sarah drove back to her apartment, the reality of the victory slowly sinking in. The money was hers. Legally, officially, definitively hers. No more hiding. No more fear of discovery. She could use it openly now, invest it properly, build the future Aunt Evelyn had wanted her to have. Emma was home from school when Sarah arrived. One look at her mother's face, and Emma knew. "You won?" Emma asked. "We won." Sarah pulled her daughter into a tight hug. "The judge said the money is ours. Aunt Evelyn's wishes were honored." Emma squeezed her tightly. "What did Uncle David say?" "He was angry. They both were. But it doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that we're safe, secure, and we can start really building the life we want." That evening, Sarah sat at the kitchen table with a notebook, making plans. Real plans, not just survival strategies. With the money legally established as hers, she could invest it properly. Create trusts for Emma's education. Save for retirement. Maybe even start a small business. The possibilities stretched out before her, vast and intimidating and thrilling all at once. Over the following months, Sarah's life transformed in ways both visible and invisible. She hired a proper financial advisor and moved most of the money into legitimate investments. She kept some inaccessible savings for emergencies, but the bulk was now working for them, growing through careful management. She enrolled Emma in a better school, on one with small class sizes and programs Sarah's public school had never offered. Emma thrived there, making friends, discovering interests Sarah hadn't known she had. She took art classes and joined the debate team. She talked about college not as an impossible dream, but as a realistic goal. Sarah herself went back to school, taking online classes toward a business degree. At 36, she was finally pursuing education she'd abandoned when she got pregnant at 19. The studying was hard, balancing work and classes and Emma's needs. But for the first time, the effort felt worthwhile. She was building something, becoming someone new. She kept working at the grocery store, but reduced her hours. She wanted Emma to see that money didn't mean laziness, that working had value beyond just survival. Plus, she'd come to genuinely like some of her co-workers. They were good people, struggling like she'd struggled, and she couldn't just abandon them. But she also started volunteering. She tutored kids at Emma's school who needed help with math. She donated to local charities that supported single mothers and families in poverty. She remembered what it felt like to be desperate and hopeless, and she used Aunt Evelyn's gift to ease that burden for others when she could. David and Monica cut off all contact. Sarah heard through extended family that they'd told everyone she'd stolen from Aunt Evelyn, manipulated a vulnerable old woman, used legal tricks to claim money that should have been shared. The stories painted her as greedy and selfish. But Sarah didn't defend herself to people who'd already made up their minds. The truth was in the court record for anyone who cared to look, and the people who mattered, the ones who knew her, understood that she'd simply accepted a gift her aunt had deliberately given her. A year after the court ruling, Sarah received a call from Mr. Whitmore. "Sarah, I hope you're doing well. I wanted to let you know that I'm retiring and closing Evelyn's estate file permanently. Before I do, I wanted to tell you something she said to me when we were planning her will." "What's that?" "She told me that David and Monica were so busy chasing success that they'd forgotten how to be decent human beings. She said she wanted to give her money to someone who understood that wealth wasn't the same as worth. She chose you deliberately, Sarah. She saw in you exactly what she'd once been. A woman dismissed and underestimated by her family, but strong enough to survive it. She wanted you to have the chance she'd earned for herself." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I wish I could thank her. I think she knew you would be grateful. That's why she chose you." After they hung up, Sarah went to Emma's room. The armoire still stood against the wall, now empty of cash, but full of Emma's things. Sarah ran her fingers over the carved surface, feeling the smooth wood beneath her palm. "Thank you, Aunt Evelyn," she whispered. "Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for believing I deserved more. I promise I'm using your gift the way you want it. I'm building something good." That weekend, Sarah took Emma on their first real vacation. They flew to New York City, stayed in a decent hotel, saw Broadway shows and museums, and all the things Sarah had only read about in magazines. They ate at restaurants where the menus didn't list prices. They walked through Central Park and took 1,000 pictures. On their last night, sitting in a small Italian restaurant in Greenwich Village, Emma looked at her mother across the table. "Mom, are you happy?" Sarah considered the question. She thought about the grocery store, the classes she was taking, the volunteer work, the investments growing steadily in accounts she could now access. She thought about this moment, in a city far from home, with her daughter, who was thriving in ways Sarah had never imagined possible. "Yes," Sarah said. "I'm happy. Are you?" Emma smiled. "Yeah, I miss Uncle David and Aunt Monica sometimes. But mostly, I'm just glad we don't have to worry anymore. And I'm glad you're not so tired all the time." "Me too, sweetheart." They finished dinner and walked back to their hotel through streets lit up with life and possibility. Sarah felt the weight of the past year, the battles fought and won, the transformation that had occurred not just in their circumstances, but in who they'd become. She'd been given a fortune hidden in furniture dismissed as junk, but the real gift hadn't been the money. It had been the permission to believe she deserved better, the validation that her struggles mattered, the knowledge that someone had seen her, truly seen her, and chosen to help. Aunt Evelyn had hidden her wealth not from the world, but for Sarah. She'd understood that sometimes treasures needed to wait for the right person to discover them. On someone who would appreciate not just their value, but the love behind them. Sarah had been that person. And now, walking through New York City with her daughter, she finally understood what Aunt Evelyn had tried to tell her in that letter. Worth wasn't about money. It was about dignity, resilience, and the courage to claim what you deserved even when everyone around you said you weren't entitled to it. The Armoire had contained $3 million, but it had delivered something more valuable, the belief that Sarah Mitchell was worth investing in, that her dreams mattered, that she deserved a chance, and with that belief, she'd built something her siblings' money could never buy, a life of purpose, security, and hope, a future where Emma could dream without limits, a legacy that would ripple forward through generations. For the money had been hidden, but Sarah's worth had been there all along, waiting to be recognized. Aunt Evelyn had simply been the first person to notice. 2 years after the court ruling, Sarah graduated with her business degree. Emma, now 13, sat in the audience with a bouquet of flowers, beaming with pride. Sarah walked across the stage in her cap and gown, accepting her diploma with hands that no longer shook from exhaustion or fear. She'd done it. Built herself back up from poverty to possibility. Used Aunt Evelyn's gift not to escape work, but to create opportunities. She was opening a small consulting business, helping other single mothers navigate financial planning and budget management, using her experience to guide women who were where she'd once been. The Armoire still stood in Emma's room. They'd never sell it. It was part of their story now, a monument to hidden value and overlooked potential. Sometimes Sarah would stand in front of it, remembering the day they'd discovered what lay behind the false panels. She'd thought the money would change everything, and it had. But not in the way she'd expected. The real transformation hadn't been financial. It had been internal. The shift from believing she deserved to struggle to knowing she deserved to thrive. That belief, more than any dollar amount, had rebuilt her life. On the 3rd anniversary of finding the money, Sarah made a donation to the local community center in Aunt Evelyn's name, a scholarship fund for women over 30 returning to school. She wanted other people to have the same chance her aunt had given her, the chance to start over, to build something new, to discover that it was never too late to claim a better life. At the dedication ceremony, standing before a small crowd of donors and recipients, Sarah told a simplified version of her story. She talked about struggle and survival and unexpected gifts. She didn't mention the exact amount she'd inherited, but she talked about what it had meant to have someone believe in her when she'd stopped believing in herself. "My aunt used to collect furniture everyone else thought was junk," Sarah said. "But she saw value where others saw waste. She understood that worth isn't always visible on the surface. Sometimes you have to look deeper. Sometimes you have to care enough to discover what others miss." She looked out at the faces in the audience, women who'd been dismissed, overlooked, told they didn't matter, just like she had been. "Fine, you all have value," Sarah said. "Even when it feels like no one sees it, even when circumstances make it hard to see it yourself. It's there. And sometimes all it takes is one person believing in you, or one opportunity arriving at the right moment, to change everything." The applause that followed was warm and genuine. After the ceremony, several women approached Sarah, thanking her, sharing their own stories. Sarah listened to each one, seeing herself in their struggles, their determination, their fragile hope that things could get better. This was what Aunt Evelyn's money was meant to do. Not just change Sarah's life, but ripple outward, creating opportunities for others who needed them. That night, back home, Sarah updated the journal she'd started keeping, a record of how she'd used the inheritance, how it had changed them, what she'd learned. Someday, when Emma was older, Sarah would give her this journal along with Aunt Evelyn's letter, a complete story of how hidden treasure had transformed their family. She wrote, "3 years ago, I was drowning, working 2 jobs, barely keeping my daughter fed, watching my life slip away one exhausted day at a time. I thought I knew what I deserved, which was nothing. I'd internalized every dismissive comment, every mocking look, every message that I'd failed at life. Then Aunt Evelyn gave me the greatest gift anyone had ever given me. Not just money, though that changed everything, but belief. She believed I deserved better. She believed I was worth investing in. She believed that under all the struggle and poverty and exhaustion, there was someone capable of so much more. She was right. The money gave me tools, but the belief gave me wings. I hope whoever reads this understands that treasures come in many forms. Sometimes they're hidden in furniture. Sometimes they're buried under years of struggle. Sometimes they're waiting inside you, overlooked by everyone, including yourself. But they're there. Your worth is there, even when no one else sees it, especially when no one else sees it. Don't let anyone convince you that you deserve less than you dream of. Don't let poverty or failure or other people's judgments define your value. You are worth investing in. You are worth fighting for. You are worth more than they tell you. Aunt Evelyn taught me that. And now I'm teaching Emma. And someday, Emma will teach her own children. That's the real inheritance, not the money, but the belief in our own worth. That's the treasure that keeps giving, a generation after generation, changing lives in ways that compound like interest. Thank you, Aunt Evelyn, for seeing me, for saving me, for reminding me that sometimes the things everyone else calls junk are actually priceless." Sarah closed the journal and looked around her home, at the comfortable furniture and the full refrigerator and the photographs of Emma smiling at her new school, at the life they'd built from a secret hidden in carved wood. The journey from poverty to security hadn't been easy. The battles with her siblings had left scars that would never fully heal, but she'd survived it all. More than survived. She'd won. And every morning when she woke up in her safe apartment, with her daughter thriving and her future secure, and Sarah remembered the moment she'd first pressed that carved rose and heard the hidden panel click open, She remembered the shock, the fear, the overwhelming weight of sudden possibility. And she remembered Aunt Evelyn's words in that letter. Live well, my dear. She was living well. Finally. Fully. Without apology. The Armoire had held millions of dollars, but more than that, it had held hope. And hope, Sarah had learned, was the most valuable treasure of all. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.